All right. Welcome everyone to the November Boise ITSM meeting. Appreciate everyone being here once again. We are here today to have a very special guest speaker, Greg Sanker, talk to us about change management. Before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and just run through a little bit of an introduction. First of all, always like to say thank you for taking time out of your day to attend our November virtual meeting. I appreciate the fact that we are able to get these back up and running over the last few months. We've had some fantastic speakers, and I expect that to continue, and we'll talk about what I want to do for our December meeting coming up here at the end. Of course, special welcome to any of our first timers. Appreciate all of you that have not been part of our group before being here, as well as attendees outside of the Boise area. That's one of the nice things about making this a virtual meeting is we have the ability to have a broader audience, which is always great. And then of course, thanks again to Greg Sanker, who I'll introduce here in just a minute, for being our presenter today. Real quick on our Boise ITSM group, we have a vision, and it's really in two pieces. Where we want to be is really about being able to continue to deliver actionable information and have that be something that you can take away from this meeting that will inspire you to make positive change in your organizations. And of course, we want to encourage attendee participation. And Greg and I were talking as this meeting was first coming online, and we really do want this to be an interactive session as Greg is presenting today. So we really do want to have the opportunity to have all of you interact with Greg as he's going through his presentation. Our why for starting this group, again, is to inspire all of you to become IT leaders and to do a good job with being able to expand your skill set and your knowledge. And of course, we feel like there's always been a little bit of an ITSM void in many of the organizations in the Boise community, and we want to fill that and have a place where like-minded leaders can congregate and learn from each other and share their stories. And now that we are virtual, of course, we have the opportunity to do that in a larger setting as well. So again, appreciate all of you for being here and understanding what we're here to do. And I encourage all of you to take some notes from this presentation and look for opportunities to have some takeaways and some things that you can work to improve your organizations and your teams. I want to do a quick introduction for Greg Sanker. Again, appreciate Greg, our special guest speaker, for being here today. I had the opportunity to meet Greg in person about 1.5 years ago over in Oregon when I was there on a family vacation. And he and I have become fast friends. Greg is absolutely a thought leader in the realm of IT service management and IT leadership. He is very well versed and is a subject matter expert on change management, now as we call it in ITIL 4, change enablement. He is the author of the Change Enablement Practice Guide for ITIL 4, which is available with subscription out on the Axelos website, or if you've taken ITIL Foundation or any of the other ITIL 4 classes, Axelos gives you a code to get access to those practice guides and the My ITIL site for 1 year for free. So make sure you're taking advantage of those opportunities. And Greg is here to talk to us about IT change management at the speed of business. So please welcome Greg. Greg, I'll go ahead and hand over sharing to you, and we'll go ahead and kick off your presentation. Okay, you should be able to take over presenting rights now, Greg. Oh, you're on mute.
Excuse me.
There we go. That's a little better, eh?
Yep, there you go.
All right. Can you see my presentation, and can everybody hear me well? Raise your hand, nod your head, do something. All right. So this is a presentation that I made at Service Management World, and I know some of you do attend that. Here's my commitment. It's unique each and every time. There's some core fundamentals that I try to get across. And I also want to recognize that this is directional. I make it as practical as possible because I get asked the question a lot. Well, so what do we do with change management when we've got Agile and DevOps and CI/CD and all these other areas that are really challenging how we do change management? What are we supposed to do? And so I speak into that space quite a bit, recognizing that not everyone or every value stream is an Agile or DevOps environment. And so it's with that recognition that I try to get to some of the fundamentals so that you can figure out what to do within your own organization. So here we go. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about who I am. I don't know that that's the most important thing that we have to talk about. You can look me up, feel free to do, and reach out and talk to me connect with me as well if you want. But let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. Traditional change management is where I'm going to start. And then we're going to talk about what's wrong with CAB. So everybody's talking about, we don't like CAB. Everybody's talking about, we don't. What is change management really? Let's talk about flow-based change management. Talk a little bit about engineering quality in, where we're talking about things like risk and complexity and resiliency within your organization, all things that we care about. And finally, we're going to wrap it up by talking about change management operating at the speed of business. Here's my request. I'm asking for you to interrupt me during this. If you have questions or if you have thoughts or you want me to explore something or I've been slightly unclear, I'd love for you to just chime in and let's talk real time about that. I think it'll make it more valuable for you, and it'll help me focus in on the areas where I can be the most value to you. So here we go. Traditional change management, I think you're all going to recognize this, is somewhere somebody says, hey, we need to do something. We need to fix something. We need to upgrade something. We need to maintain something. There's some idea that eventually turns into we start doing some activities associated with building a change. If it's code, we develop code. If it's a router config, we do router configs. We do something, and eventually that something that we do goes into production in some way, shape, or form. All right. And so we recognize this form, regardless of how you're doing it, where you're doing it, or what methodologies. These are some of the essential building blocks. And this is where change management traditionally sits. It sits right here between the developing something, and let's just make sure before we move it into production that we screw it in, don't screw it up. That's kind of the focus. Like, don't let bad things happen in production. Unfortunately, modern business is operating more like this, or it's moving at a speed that's more like this, while we're still back here doing something a little more like this, right? CAB this way. And as you know, if all roads lead to CAB, if everything is going there, what do we have at the CAB? We have a traffic jam, we have congestion, we have slowdown, we have frustration. I mean, imagine being in this mess here, right? So this is what we find ourselves in modern organizations. And trust me, I've been asked to help some rather large organizations with their change management, and they have these bottlenecks. And there's some of what I'm going to share is really there's some fundamentals that we have to change to move forward. So if we talk about over time, this is a quick history lesson in brief, and feel free to disagree with me, but this is directional. This isn't factual data that's kind of honed to perfection, but you understand that we've been through these different eras, from mainframe to distributed web, cloud, et cetera, and all of those kind of things. But what's interesting is that the size of an individual release or a change has significantly decreased over time. So back here in the mainframe era, if you will, changes could be, coded for 3, 6, 9, 12, 18 months or more in development. There are very large changes that were released in one fell swoop. Here's the new version of the financial transaction system, et cetera. But as we move forward, we started seeing the size of individual changes or releases shrinking over time through these different kind of, and again, this isn't to scale, or it isn't even necessarily the right, it depends on the organization, but we see the trend is towards smaller and smaller changes, where when you get over here to the far right in continuous integration, these changes could be almost microscopic in nature. So here's what happened over time is, as the size went down, the volume went up, and we crossed over in a theoretical mathematical point in time where what we were doing doesn't work at the speed and the volume that we're doing now. And for some organizations, we haven't reached that. But the thing is, we've reached a point where we can't just do the same thing, only different. We have to fundamentally change what it is that we're doing. How many of you know who this guy is? Anybody? I bet you do. This picture has become quite familiar at this point. This is Edwards Deming. And, you've heard of the Deming's principle. If you've ever attended an ITIL training class, sometimes we talk about Deming. Well, Deming had some bright...
Is there anything that scans prices?
Okay. Somebody's not muted. So Deming said some things like, we've got to cease reliance on mass inspection. We've got to engineer the quality into the process along the way. And quality is everybody's responsibility. So there's some significant implications of that. And can you, Jeff, could you mute whoever's that is? Thank you so much. And the last thing that he said, sorry, I advanced that, was that a bad system is going to beat a good person each and every time. So if you've heard of the Toyota production system, we talk about it a lot in IT, and that it's kind of a flow-based system, and that quality is everyone's responsibility. So in the old days, I put on tires, I assemble whatever. That's what I do, and I do it to the best of my ability, and my responsibility is to make sure my thing works really well. I don't know what's happening upstream. I don't know what's happening downstream. But they've got the idea that, look, if you're producing errors or defects at any way along the way, we need to get everybody involved with it. And in the Toyota system, everybody pulls the rope, like the bus stop rope, and they stop the line, and everybody comes rushing over to say, hey, what's going on here? And this happens all the time. And the reason is because everybody is involved with quality. It's not the responsibility of the person that's driving the car off the end of the line. And if the systems are created in a way that doesn't produce the desired results, no matter how well intended, how hardworking people are, the system is going to beat them out every time. Now, I focus on this quite a lot. These are not unique thoughts. You've heard these a lot. But how they get applied to change management up to this point has been relatively mysterious. And I'm going to try to make some sense out of that for you today. So let's talk about flow. Like if you have moving water, right? We recognize you fill a pail with water. There's a bucket, and let's just say that that's a fire bucket. You've seen in movies or pictures or whatnot of a bucket brigade putting out a fire at a building, and we hand a bucket from person to person to person, put it on the fire, and hand back the empty buckets. And the idea here is we're moving the water, we're moving it from place to place, but we're doing it in a batch size. Now, modern fire suppression, this is from a commercial installation of fire suppression, uses flow. And you notice that there's big pipes and smaller pipes, and there's spigots, and it's engineered to produce the right amount of water at the right point in time in the right place. And I don't know about you, but if I'm in a building that's on fire, I'm going to put my money on this modern flow-based system to make sure that the right amount of fire suppression is where it needs to be. And that's kind of what we're trying to do with change management. So what I'm going to do is pause for just a minute, and let's talk about what is change management. At its core value, what is change management? We know a lot about it, but some of that is myth and mystery and tradition. So first and foremost is IT change management is an organizational capability. In ITIL 4, we call it a practice, but what it is it's a practice that's designed to support timely and effective implementation of things that the business cares about, manage business risk. And I want to emphasize, this is business risk. This is not risk that I'm going to spend the night fixing a problem that I released. This is risk to the business of those changes, as is managing negative impact to the business and making sure that those outcomes that we're trying to produce, what is it that we're trying to do for the business? Let's make sure that those things actually happen. And then we need to make sure that whatever our governance and compliance expectations, that those are also met along the way. These are the five goals, if you will, or the five fundamentals that we're trying to achieve with change management. So why do I focus on that? I focus in on that because they lay the foundation for us being able to successfully manage changes at the speed of business. So these become very, very important. But what's missing from my list? And if we were in a live session, I'd make you call those out, but I won't do that. But there's some things that are missing here, and you see it, obviously. There's not a prescriptive process or a specific methodology here. In fact, there's no methodology even implied at all. It's talking about outcomes. So there's no mention of CAB meetings or inspecting every change, right? So these are things that we do a lot of in change management that aren't necessarily part of the outcome expectations that we should be focusing in on. So what does that actually mean to us? And I get asked this a lot. Well, then what's the role of the CAP? So I'm going to face it head on. Is it an approval? Is it an authorization? Is it advisory? Is it some form of a peer review or communication and coordination? Do we do conflict resolution? Or is it just a mother, may I please implement this change so my business can have what they need? And the fact is, at times it's any or all of these. But let's talk about what we really need to do. But if you think about your average traditional change management, this is a neat little graphic that's an individual RFC. And if we focus on the concept of inspection, remember Deming said, we don't rely on mass inspection. But what we're doing with the traditional change management is we're really focusing on each and every request for change. It's a last check before it goes into production, and it essentially is a quality inspection point. That's what it is. So this is the paradigm that we need to get right to the heart of the matter if we need to move at the speed of business with modern methodology. So what we need to do is elevate away from inspection into expectation. I know it's a little play on similar sounding words, but over here on expectations now, we're focusing on the change outcomes, not the individual changes, where we become focused on governance and oversight of the process. And we're looking at end to end, making sure that those expectations are being met in the individual pipelines. If you wanted to put my presentation in a nutshell, this is really it. This is the heart of the matter is we have to make that shift away from inspecting everything into setting expectations and making sure those are being achieved. So here's this cool graphic that I made talking about changes in the pipeline, right? So let's put a couple of pipe fittings on here. And over here, we have this great crystal clear water that's flowing into our pipe. And it flows over here. And after we open the valve over here, out comes a drop of water. But what happens if something yucky goes into our water? My question for you is, how much can this valve protect us from what's in the pipeline? And the answer, of course, is not that much. Once something yucky goes into the pipeline, there's nothing we can do about it. So you've heard about the whole concept of shifting left. And I want to talk about that in a change management perspective. And there is actually a lot more to be said on this. That hopefully you'll be able to read from me in the near future. But over here, we have the idea that regardless of how you're managing changes in your organization, you have some form of process that says, these are the things that we're going to do. Maybe it's a product backlog. Maybe you have a product owner that's making those decisions, or a service owner, or operations managers, or somebody's making decisions about the things that go into the pipeline. We recognize that. And we've been focusing traditionally on, and regardless of how the changes get made or who's doing them or when, we don't even focus on that. We focus primarily on, hey, before they go into production, it needs to come to cabin. We need to put that little green okay to go a stamp on it. And if we think about shifting left, we need to move our focus over here on the left side of the pipeline. And we do that by becoming very familiar with the pipeline itself. Now, let me pause and be very specific. You understand that pipelines are more than just a continuous integration pipeline where it's highly automated, code branching, commits, and all that sort of stuff. This includes all kinds of changes, including servers and routers and everything else we do in IT is everything is delivered through some value stream. And that's why it's really important in ITIL 4. We talk about value streams more than we talk about processes, because there's hundreds of value streams in most organizations, each of which is delivering changes. And so when we shift our focus to the pipeline, then here we go. If you've any familiarity with ITIL 4, you've seen a diagram that has demand on the left and value over here on the right. And the idea is that we don't, a process, this is a little bit of a bonus here, is, a process has inputs, a trigger, steps that we take, and then we have outputs on the right-hand side. So practices are very different. Our capabilities are very different. So we have a demand for something. There has to be an established business need for anything to occur. And that happens through lots of processes, lots of governance associated with doing that. But we're not done until value is delivered to our stakeholders here. All right. So this is what I'm talking about when I talk about change outcomes. So what we want to focus in on is putting the right means and measures, or the telemetry, as I like to call it, on the pipeline itself. And again, there could be hundreds of pipelines. I want to emphasize that. That's not a generic one size, but this is very, very specific. And when we have the right telemetry on the pipelines, then we're looking at the pipeline's ability to achieve outcomes and deliver value and to deliver time to value. In other words, are we getting the things that the business needs when the business needs them? Likewise, the pipeline also has some formula for creating failed changes and measuring the business impact of those changes and how quickly are we able to recover and minimize the impact to the business. So when we start talking about shifting over to outcomes, then we literally are talking about, so the pipeline that feeds, for instance, our general ledger application, the code that's going in there, the servers that go in there, how does over time, how well is that performing? How consistently are changes achieving the business results? How consistently are we not getting failed changes, or when we do, how quickly can we recover from that? That's what we want to become focused on, not each and every individual change. So let's just talk a little bit about change outcome expectations. This becomes a little bit of a document activity, right? Because this is where the organization actually says, look, these are our expectations for changes. And they could state things like changes must be reviewed and approved, changes must be tested, changes, et cetera, et cetera. But when we get into compliance expectations, this starts getting really, really fascinating. So hold on to that one for just a second. And it's unique, or it can or should be unique for each change producing value stream. And it has to, just like SMART goals, it has to be able to be specific and measurable and achievable, et cetera. In other words, an outcome expectation for changes that you can't actually measure if you're achieving isn't a very good outcome expectation. It's just a good idea. They need to be documented and widely understood. And I'm going to say a little bit more about this in a minute. Governance, risk, compliance need to be built in. If you have to adhere to PCI DSS and there's specific things in there about how changes are managed, then those are outcome expectations. Same with NIST 853, my favorite NIST document, is there are specific controls in there for changes. And if those apply to us, then we have to make sure that we're adhering to those, but we don't necessarily have to specify where that's happening or how that's happening or even by whom. And I encourage organizations to shift their focus away from change policies, which we've been doing for years. I've helped many organizations with creating change policies, but we want to shift more into a document that states what the outcome expectations are. And I'm going to take a breath and slow down for a minute. I know I'm going really fast because I want to leave time for questions here, and I've got a lot to cover here. But this becomes really important. Documented and widely understood becomes really important. And here's why. Because change management is not the ones that specify how it's going to be done. It's those that are working in the value streams that understand that I need to achieve this outcome. And they have the latitude within that value stream to create the best, most effective way to do that, to achieve that outcome in the pipeline that is appropriate. And so change management says, let's be really clear on what those outcomes are. Let's measure how well we're achieving them. But how you actually do that, that's for the value streams to decide. It's very DevOpsy, very agile, very self-organizing teams friendly. It's very friendly to that. And by the way, if you have a mainframe application that you have no intention of changing how you deliver it, Waterfall works very well with this because change is still concerned with, are you achieving those outcomes that we need to have? I didn't say how you were doing that. If you're manually testing it with a spreadsheet of are all the features still working, that's fine. And if that's an outcome that's required, let's just make sure you're doing that. And then you continue on as you are. This is a very adaptive approach. And this is why it's very important that we need to shift our focus to what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And let's just make sure we do. All right, back to speed. Engineering quality is comprised of three main parts, I'm going to say. They are risk and complexity and resiliency. And I'm going to go do a crash course on all three of these in an insanely short period of time. So forgive me, and I do recognize that this topic is very complex, but you get that, right? And you've done a lot of these things in other contexts. So when I talk about managing risk, you guys have seen this little diagram for years and years and years, right? And we have risk that goes from low to high, and it's primarily tied to things like, well, what bad things can happen and how likely are they to happen? And if they do happen, what's the impact to the organization? And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not very adaptive. And so I've introduced the concept of the blast radius. It's not unique to me. I didn't invent it, but it's much more adaptive and focuses in on the business risk. And here's how that works is you recognize that if you have in a CI/CD chain, if you have a very microscopic change to one section of one business application, that has a very small radius. In other words, if something bad happens, how much of the business is at risk? How much of the business system or the business itself is put at risk? And if it's relatively small, that has a different level of risk than if the entire system or multiple systems or maybe the entire organization. Maybe we're migrating from on-prem into a cloud, or we're moving from one ERP provider to another. Those kind of things, as you recognize, have more risk as the radius gets broader. And whatever we're doing needs to be adaptive to doing that. Now, watch this, is we recognize then as the level of risk goes up in an organization, the required approval is by necessity a little bit different. So let me put it this way. I've worked with an organization as a rather large Fortune 100 company whose entire ability to process point of sale transactions was put at risk because of one change. Now, point of sale at thousands of outlets across the North America is pretty significant business risk. But the change was approved at a fairly low level in that organization because it was believed that it was a low risk change because the blast radius, what's the worst that could happen? So the business owner or the responsible manager at the business level outside of IT, did they know that their entire ability to process transactions for 8 hours was at risk? They probably didn't. And so they weren't able to weigh in on whether that was an acceptable level of business risk or not. Okay. So as we talk about what is the level of authority required, oftentimes in the past we've asked ourselves, well, I want to know who's going to get fired if this thing goes bad. All right, that's the wrong question. We've asked it for years. I've asked that question, but a better question is who doesn't get fired if this thing goes bad, because that's the person that has the appropriate level of authority to take this business risk on. And I can talk more about that if you want to. All right, here's a diagram that I made. The flow through this doesn't indicate anything other than you might recognize that over to the left, there's an opportunity or demand, and over to the right in the yellow on the upper side is business value. And there's a few things that happen in the context of a change. There's somebody that decides, hey, this is our top priority. This is what we're going to go forward with. We move to development, test and validate. We do an approve to release. We get the business value, and then we validate, we learn, we do something with it, right? These are normal kind of things that we do in a modern context. But down here on number 5, this is where I got a challenge is you wouldn't put anything into the pipeline that you didn't actually intend to do. And so this whole change management doesn't get involved until the very end. It's rather silly, actually, because there's a difference between validating the change as we think it's going to actually work as we planned is separate and distinct from approving that we in this organization want this change to happen. And that needs to happen over here at the governance. In other words, we're shifting the approval, the change approval left. Now, here's the analogy, and I didn't give this on the talk I gave the other day, and that is, look, when you pull the trigger on a gun, you don't, at the end of the barrel, stop the bullet and take a look at the bullet and go, yep, that's the right caliber. Yep, it's moving at about the right speed. Yep, all right, off you go then. You don't pull the trigger until you know you're locked on the target. You have a strong belief that you're going to hit your target before you pull the trigger. And in change, we need to think in those terms is don't authorize something to go into the pipeline until you know that you want that. And we develop the pipelines to the point where we believe that once we move it in there, we're going to achieve the results that we want. So moving your approval from the end of the process to the early part of the process now allows us to create a feedback loop. And if you're familiar with DevOps at all, you know it's all about short feedback loops. Change management can become a feedback loop when it's operating in this space. It cannot be a feedback loop when it's a last check, mother, may I ship that product? And so that's why this becomes really important in a modern context that we do that. Now, I'm going to cover complexity. And if you're familiar with the Cynefin framework, Dave Snowden and a whole host of characters have been working on this for years and years and years. So I'm going to give him the utter disrespect of suggesting that in 2 minutes I'm going to cover his life's work. All right, so go buy his book. He just published it a couple of weeks ago, and it's a fantastic volume. But here's how it relates to change management. There's kind of 4 generalized areas. There's actually 5, but I'm only going to talk about the 4 most obvious ones now. Is in some cases, a system is clear. In other words, there's a clear tie between a cause and effect or action and reaction. And the activities that we do around sense, categorize, and response. In other words, what is it? We got that, and out we go. And this is where we apply best practices. Where there's a clear tie between inputs, outputs, cause and effect, that's best practice. We know how to handle this. We got a good way. If something is complicated, it's a little different. We have to sense and then do some analysis before we know how to respond. And this is where we apply good practice. This is where we put experts, people who are subject matter experts at medical science or bridge building or whatever, because for them, it's actually relatively easy, but it requires a level of expertise that might defy my knowledge or other people who are not familiar with that. Now, I'm going to come back to this and explain it a little bit. I just want to kind of briefly go around the circle here. Complex is a very different beast. And in complex situations, we need to probe, which just means we need to do some experimentation. Like we don't know how it works. And so we need to probe and then start responding to the data that comes in, sensing the data that comes in before we know how to respond. And this is the area of discovery. We need to understand that we're trying to figure it out before we know what the right thing to do is. And I'm going to come back to that. Now, chaotic, which seems like our world in the last 12 months, that's where we have to take some action. We don't know how the system works. And there is no tie between cause and effect. You do one thing and you produce a result, and the next time you do it, it produces a completely different result. There's just no sense to this activity. And so we have to take some action to start creating some boundaries around the situation. And this is where we have a lot of unknowable unknowns. All right, so I completely disrespected Dave Snowden. I highly recommend going out and looking for some of his material. He's got YouTube videos. He's got a lot of good materials in his, like I said, his book. Here's how it applies to us. Typically, a CAB is applied in this context where we think things are clear, and sometimes we'll move it up here and then we delegate, through standard changes, we delegate some authority through standard changes down to where things are very simple and very clear. You've known this for years. ITIL has talked about this. But the fact of the matter is modern systems, cloud systems, are actually complex. And so in a complex system, we need to be adaptive, and there is not a one size fits all. We have to be context aware of what situation are we in? And 0 failures is not the goal. If we are having to probe and to act to figure out how the system works, that's experimentation. And there's some risk of failure or some risk of defects if that's happening. So we have to be experimenting and learning, and we have to create areas where it's safe to fail so that for the purpose of learning, and our systems need to become more resilient. And that moves change management. The beautiful graphic that just happened in front of your face there is change management then becomes more focused on governance and oversight over the entire practice to make sure that regardless of what quadrant we're in, we're applying the right means and methods. And that's not specified from on high. That's letting the folks that are working it understand it. All right. So I just did a crash course, and feel free to ask questions about that. But the other field of study that I'm going to disrespect in a very, very short field is antifragile. There's a number of PhD level folks that are incredibly intelligent that study the concepts of antifragile, and I highly recommend it at all. But the thesis, if I can distill it down, again, somebody's life work into a 2-minute talk, is that some systems become more fragile when they're not stressed. Other systems, when they're stressed, they become less fragile. And those systems are said to be anti-fragile systems. And complex adaptive systems, most of our modern systems actually qualify as anti-fragile. And so if you take the mindset that we've had for years and years and years, that we don't want any bad things to happen in production, don't let anything upset the apple cart in production. That's the prime directive, zero defects, right? But what we're finding is that that actually makes your systems more fragile. Here's the analogy. Here in Oregon, we have logging and we have laws around logging to protect the environment and the animals and the riparian areas. And we leave trees, by law, we leave trees at the edge of a piece of property that's been logged. And those trees then, who used to have neighbors, and when the wind blew, they kind of worked together as a system to make themselves strong and resilient. And when you take down their neighbors, those trees, and I found this to be true, is you find that frequently some of those trees will be broken in the wind in the 12 months following the logging of those trees next to them. Why? Because they didn't benefit from the direct wind pushing them as they're growing, which actually makes the fibers more resilient and not just stronger, but stronger in a way that helps them with the wind. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about anti-fragile. But you recognize that if we're trying to dogmatically make sure that nothing bad ever happens, we're acting like the system is simple or at most complicated, and we're acting like it's a fragile system and not an anti-fragile system, so that it benefits from don't change anything and it'll be better that way. And so whatever we do for change management has to embrace growth and learning that allows for some level of exploration and learning, because our systems are vastly more complicated than they ever were. All right, so here's where we turn the corner, and hopefully we're going to turn it in on time, Jeff. What about the cab? What do we do about the cab? Well, there's the signal. We want to reduce, we want to reuse, and we want to recycle. So let me quickly go through what that looks like. If you have a cab and it's got brand recognition, then we want to reduce what's going to cab. We just do. That's part of the don't inspect everything. Push down into the value chains as much as we can. We delegate, we create standard changes, we reduce the release size, which is part of the engineering. We automate things where we can through automated testing or deployment methodologies and things like that. So that's what I mean by reduce. Is just start the process of getting things, as much things as possible. Even if you feel like it's risky, move in that direction, because your value streams will become more resilient. And at the same time, we want to reuse the cab in ways that they weren't. We want to start monitoring the value streams themselves, and are the outcomes actually being achieved? We become part of the feedback mechanism. We change management. You talk about DevOps, that we want short feedback loops. Well, change management is one of those feedback loops when it's not focused on each and every change. And we want to focus on change governance. We want to focus on learning and improvement, right? So that's kind of the reuse of your cab or your change process. And recycling it puts us in collaboration with the value streams. That's a whole new purpose. We've not done that before. We've not been welcomed as collaborators. We're the mother may I, we're the firing line, the board of inquisition, whatever. But to be seen as a value added collaborator with those that are working in the value streams is really, really new. We need to help with the value streams to facilitate change outcomes being actually achieved. And sometimes you do need, like if you're moving from an on-prem to a cloud solution, that's not something that came on to you and 4 hours later you're going to execute that. For changes that really are that big, you may want to form a cab or some meeting like a cab where you're actually able to address those very, very high risk change. There's nothing wrong with that, right? So real quickly, this is what we talked about today. We need to refocus on governance and oversight. We need to be focused on pushing it into the value streams. We need to shift to be focused on outcomes and business. And we need to be agnostic to whatever approach is being used. Because as soon as we adopt an approach, it becomes obsolete. And so we have to be moving forward in adaptive sort of ways. All right, how'd we do, Jeff?
Excellent. We're in really good shape. So I'm going to go ahead just real quick. I'm sure a lot of you have questions and want to take the opportunity to interact with Greg, but I have just a couple of quick slides that I want to do. If I can take screen sharing back, Greg, that I want to do just to close out, and then we'll open it back up for some Q&A. All right. Let's see if I can get back to my slides. Okay. So just a couple of quick announcements that I want to share, and then we'll go ahead and open it up for Q&A. So first of all, I want to make sure that everybody's aware of some of the upcoming ITSM Academy training opportunities. I actually just got a text on one of these here during the session, so it's kind of interesting timing. Direct Plan and Improve ITIL 4 Intermediate course is happening December 1st through 4th. The Drive Stakeholder Value course, which I happen to be teaching, is December 7th through 10th. There's a Certified Agile Service Manager class, December 8th through 11th, and then the next ITIL 4 Foundation class for those of you that are still just jumping on board with your ITIL 4 improvement journey is January 12th through 15th. I have a discount code listed here, iTrain at 15. You can get a 15% discount off of any of those public ITSM Academy classes. So I hope you take advantage of that. Our next meeting I have scheduled tentatively for Tuesday, December 15th is the time I'm looking at. And for our December meeting, I'm looking at making it a group roundtable. And I'd like to talk specifically about this past year, do a little bit of reflection about 2020 and some of our lessons learned from this past year and get a sense of where are we all going into 2021 and what are some of our lessons learned? What are some of the things that we can take forward and share with each other to improve on our current challenges and opportunities? So I'm looking forward to making a little bit more of a roundtable meeting in our next meeting. One of the things I wanted to make sure that we highlighted is another opportunity to learn and grow outside of this meeting is a forum called Keep the Learning On that Greg is a big part of and one of the 4 main participants for that opportunity to see their website and to watch and even sometimes even interact within their weekly presentations. So Greg, do you want to talk a little bit about Keep the Learning On real quick for everybody?
First of all, there's no money associated with Keep the Learning On, at least it's not yet. So we're not plugging a product. It's me and a couple of colleagues that got together and started addressing some meaningful topics, usually around culture and leadership and transformation within organizations. And the panel is insanely qualified, myself accepted, of course. And we dig deep into these topics. We just did episode 35 this morning. They're all available on YouTube or go to the Keep the Learning On. But it's a dialogue. It's a community involvement because it is our desire to help struggling or would-be leaders be successful in moving themselves forward. And the whole idea is we need to always be learning. We need to be growing and developing ourselves and expanding ourselves. So I encourage you all to tune in and give us a listen. If you do, just say hi. You're welcome to join in. Sometimes we'll call on you. If Jeff shows up, we'll probably make him talk. If you show up and don't want to talk, we won't make you talk. But feel free. We're live every Friday. And all of our sessions are recorded on YouTube.
All right, fantastic. Yeah, please do take advantage of the opportunity to engage with Greg's YouTube channel. And like he said, the other folks that are part of that are phenomenal thought leaders and really worth listening to. And I've got the link here to the website, which also has a link to the YouTube channel. I've been able to go back. I've been able to attend a couple of those, but mostly have had schedule conflicts with training. So I've tried to go back and listen to them. And I always get a lot of value out of them. So I wanted to make sure that we mentioned that. Final quick announcement is just want to continue to encourage all of you to spread the word about this group, especially now that we've gone virtual. I'd love to see us continue to have a greater and greater audience and greater opportunities to bring in speakers and to improve our impact and our ability to share and grow and become better leaders with each other. So if you've found this meeting and the previous meetings we've had several months in a row now since we've gone back to spinning this meeting up and being virtual with some phenomenal speakers, please do encourage others to connect with us on Meetup and also in our Boise ITSM LinkedIn group where I post the announcements of the upcoming meetings and also send out links to things like Keep the Learning On and some of the ITSM Academy webinars. Rand, who was just on, did a phenomenal ITSM Academy webinar yesterday. And Greg and Rand and I also spoke at the Service Management World Conference this week and had some really good feedback on all of those sessions. So encourage everyone to continue to spread the word and to keep our movement growing. That's all I have in terms of announcements. I'll go ahead and shut down my sharing. Who has a question for Greg? Please take advantage of the opportunity to come off mute and to ask Greg a question about his presentation, or even just share some feedback around what you liked.
Let me kind of feel the prime the pump a little bit.
Sure.
In a great many cases, I get questions like, these are really challenging questions. We have a group, you name the group, whether it's app dev or infrastructure or networking or whomever, they just don't do change management. They won't do it. What do we do? And the unfortunate thing there is it's a cultural problem. It's not a process problem. It's not a service management problem. It's a cultural problem. And so it's really hard to quickly give somebody, well, here's 3 steps to get you going in the right direction. I have more decades of experience doing change management and service management that I'd care to let on, and I don't have the magic answers. The thing is, that service management or focus on business value becomes a cultural thing. And so one of the things that ITIL 4, if nothing else that it did, and it's not the be all end all, it's just that I'm really happy that ITIL 4 really started focusing away from process and really started focusing in on the business and the value that we deliver to the business. It's really, really important. And so one of the things that I've recommended for a very long time, long before ITIL 4 came along, is go make friends with people. Go get in the habit, back when we could, of go taking people out for coffee and just say, so what's your experience with change management? And don't say, hey, how do I get you to start doing what you're supposed to do? Just say, what's your experience with change management? And be willing to listen to the feedback. I've had these conversations, and sometimes people give me the look over the glasses like, you really want to know? You really want to hear the truth? The truth is that you guys act like a bunch of jerks of playing Mother May I, and I've got business to serve, and I get in trouble, and my boss is down my throat because my service is down, and you want me to come over there and obey your little process, right? And so I think, thank you. That's incredible, and thank you for being sincere and honest about that. Here's the thing. How can we work together to make your experience not that? And talk about adding value to the business. Because things like that, I was asked recently, it's like the infrastructure team creates most of the major incidents, but we have no record of any changes. So it's like, all right, so to the business, is that okay? Is that okay that we have unknown causes to major incidents? So engage in conversations around things that we can agree on, not that we disagree on. You should come to CAB. We can disagree over that. We should be producing high quality results for our customers that our customers find valuable. I think we can agree on that. So that's something that I'm asked a lot. It's a question that I always cringe a little bit when that question is coming my way, because I don't have a magic answer, but there are principles, I think, that are important.
Yeah, that's a great point, Greg. And I'm actually consulting with an organization right now that's having that exact problem. Their infrastructure considers what they're doing just maintenance and small fixes, and they don't think they need to come to CAB, and they think if anything breaks, they can just fix it real quick. They
Yep.
don't understand the risk or the impact. One question I have for you, Greg, that I'll ask real quick is, I really like the fact that you mentioned blast radius. That's something that I've been incorporating more. Actually, when I look at a risk matrix, I kind of am starting to substitute that as the impact. When we talk about likelihood, do we have a track record or not?
Yeah.
Do we have some sense of the complexity, which leads into the likelihood of something maybe going wrong? And then I'm kind of shifting blast radius into that part of that definition of what is the impact. And your slide that demonstrated that scale and then linking it to authority, I thought was fantastic. Are you seeing more and more of that blast radius being used that way?
We are, and it's been used in app dev, and of course it's a military term. You know that, right? How much collateral damage is this activity going to do? But from a business standpoint, it's really, really important. You guys, I'm sure you're familiar with, or at least heard about. Facebook was down for 24 hours last year. And it's a little bit passe that because it's been a year and nobody's been still talking about it. But think about that. Having Facebook down for 24 hours, I would not want to be one of the infrastructure folks responding to that. That's massive. Why? Because grandma can't look at grandkid pictures? No, because every day that organization is receiving somewhere in the neighborhood of $90 million of revenue for ads. And those ad purchasers were very concerned that they were getting zero value out of that 90 million spend. And that result actually hit their stock price. The financial markets responded to that outage. It had significant business risk. But as it turned out, the change that triggered it, and it's always a change, the change was actually very, very small. One change, one server that through automation propagated throughout the system. And then every time they fixed it, it repropagated the same problem back out again. So my question is, did the organization understand that the blast radius was total blackout, total devastation for 24 hours? And the answer is no, they didn't. Otherwise, they would not have done that. Now, before you think I'm criticizing Facebook, I'm not. Facebook is in a league of their own, up with some other elite players in their ability to handle changes. But they understand the risk that they're playing with. They know what they're doing. Not all organizations have that level of sophistication around the blast radius and the actual cost, because nobody at Facebook, to the best of my knowledge from the outside, got fired for this. Why? Because we knew the risk that we were taking. We understood it. And the other thing that they did was they adapted very, very quickly. I guarantee that their approach to handling those kinds of changes has changed without adding bureaucracy. They've gotten better. They learned. Remember, we talked about anti-fragile and complexity. That's exactly what they applied to get better. They allowed themselves to experience a failure, and they harvested all kinds of good lessons from that. And that's where we need to be organizationally.
Yeah, great example. Appreciate you sharing that. All right, anyone have a question or even just feedback on Greg's presentation that you'd like to come off mute and share? Don't be shy.
Well, I'm
We've
not.
got a few more minutes.
I'm not that unapproachable. Jeff, allow me to put up my screen again, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
If I can share that, and I want to put that up. Oops, that up right there. If you want to reach out and connect with me, if you want to ask me a question offline, that's my email address. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I try to share valuable content on both LinkedIn and Twitter, and you can engage me there. But if you just want to have an offline conversation, just send me an email. I tell you, I'm not one of those people that say I'm accessible, and I'm not. Though some weeks are easier than others to get a hold of me, as Jeff can attest. But I am responsive, and I'm here to help. I'm happy to help the community, just like the community that you're building here, as I'm part of a community that actually helps people actually do stuff.
You bet. Yep, definitely take advantage of that opportunity. See, we've seen most folks dropping off. I suspect some folks have to jump off and get to their next meeting. Michael, I see you're still here. Dave, you're here. Any quick thoughts or feedback before we close up for the day? You guys still out there? All right, well, feel free to chat in or let me know your feedback on the meeting. Greg, one final thought I'll say that I think just philosophically, I know you and I are very much aligned in how we think, and in a lot of ways, the shift left piece of this has always been fascinating for me. And you think about the whole idea of not making CAB this final deployment gate, but really trying to get it to the point of where the decision's actually made to do the work before we do the work, has really been a challenge for me in some organizations to shift that thinking. And what I try and say from my perspective is, what can you do at the end if you find something that you've inspected and doesn't meet your expectations? At that point, you've already made most likely a commitment to the customer that you're going to release something by a certain amount of time, and you're coming in days, if not even hours before that.
Yeah.
And so if we find anything that wrong, means we're going to stop and go fix that. And that's going to push your schedule out and then break your commitment to your customer and make them unhappy. That's one consequence.
Yep.
The other consequence could be that senior leadership says, well, we made this promise to the customer and we're going to go ahead and override the CAB and do it anyway, and not take account to the fact that something could add on additional risk or incidents potentially to that scenario, what have you found is the best way to try and help foster that shift left? Let's approve the work before we do it, knowing we're going to need to potentially manage some deltas along the way versus continuing to do things the way we always have.
Well, I did some early work with shift left about 10 years ago with an organization. And one of the things that we found was we at that time we were using the cab because it was a mainframe shop. I can just be really honest. It was a mainframe shop. But I said, why don't we just come here with a literal change proposal? Just say, we need to, add some stuff to the database or whatnot. And everyone was like, oh my gosh, really, really, really? So we did it. And one of the conversations that I had was there was significant issues raised with the proposed approach. And during the meeting, they actually changed their approach before they went forward. And then it was approved with the modification to go forward. And so this gets back to, classic lean or process engineering of, any waste, any rework is antithetical to producing the results that you really, really want. And so if you allow waste because you didn't put the right people on it, the right eyeballs, or you decided to do something that, you decided at the end is like, that's just too risky. It's like, that's all waste. And we can't afford that in modern organizations. But one of the you asked the $1 million question that does not have a simple answer, and that is, how do you get people thinking differently? Because so frequently the vantage point of change management is, if you have a perception of being Mother May I, if you show up, it's going to be, oh great, you're going to make life more difficult for us. And so you have to earn the opportunity to say, no, we're here to actually work with you and to get out of your way. But we do have an obligation to the organization about managing change-related risk and governance and compliance related issues. So we need to be building those partnerships.
Yeah, very much agree. And that can't just be a flip the switch, snap your fingers type of thing like you were talking about, right?
Yeah, it's a whole new world. I'm here
You've
now.
got to actually go embed yourself with those teams and actually just sit back and observe what they're doing and how they're doing it and see where you can add value. I think that's definitely one thing I've learned.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, fantastic. Looks like we've lost most of our audience. Dave, you're still on. Did you have any final questions, comments?
Come on, Dave, come off mute. All right, well, you know how to get a hold of me.
Yeah, likewise. No, and when we're overdue to get back in touch. I hope you have a terrific week next week and a great Thanksgiving. Greg, thank you for being here. I will go ahead and post this out on my YouTube channel after I process the recording and send you the link to, so you can share it with your peers.
Thank you.
We'll make sure that people can get value out of this great presentation outside of those who are able to be here during the live recording today. So thank you very much. Thanks for being here, and we'll be in touch soon. Look forward to seeing everyone at our meeting next month.